Brexit? Well, let's speak to Miatta Fahnbulleh, Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation. Good afternoon to you, Miatta.
Good afternoon, Matthew.
Good afternoon. So, this £2.1 billion, well, I mean, it's not just, it doesn't exist on its own, does it? This is an additional £2.1 billion that's being promised.
It is. Well, it's an additional £2.1 billion on top of the £4.2 billion that Philip Hammond had allocated to no deal planning, or to Brexit planning rather, in 2016. But, look, it's really good that the government is loosening the purse strings. My view is that they should have done this a really long time ago rather than inflict years of austerity on us. But spending $2 billion to plan for a no deal, something that we don't have to do, something that's a political choice that the government's own economic watchdog says will cost us and will tip us into recession, is absolute madness. This money should be going to things like funding our public services, our schools, our hospitals, putting police on the street.
But Miatta, hang on. We've been promised that when we leave the European Union, even though Boris got the figures wrong because he failed to take into account the rebate that Mrs Thatcher won, but when we leave, we're going to be putting a sum that he said was not unadjacent to £350 million a week into our NHS. All we've got to do, Miatta, is just get out of the European Union first.
Well, yeah, all we have to do is get out and have blind faith. The truth and the reality is that every credible economist says that if we leave, and particularly if we leave on the kind of reckless terms that Prime Minister Johnson's talking about and leave on no deal, it will cost us it's going to cost the economy. So, the government's own watchdog said it's going to cost about $30 billion a year. So whatever money we gain that we're not paying back into the EU, and, by the way, that money is going... Some of it's coming back to us to do things like infrastructure projects in the UK, to do things like, social projects, paying for schools, for hospitals. So some of that $39 billion we're going to have to spend on stuff anyway. But the big point is we're going to be losing out. Anything we bring back will be kind of cancelled. So the whole thing makes absolutely no economic sense.
But it may make no economic sense, but as you quite rightly said earlier, it's a political decision. One might argue it's a political decision made by the people. Our MPs, our sovereign parliament, I think, overall aren't that interested in a no deal, but they're going to be pushing for one because that's what the public have asked for. So I guess if we end up £30 billion a year worse off, people lose their jobs, tough.
Yeah, well, so the public voted to leave the European Union. And remember, we were told that getting a deal to leave would be the easiest thing in the world. We were. Leaving on no deal. People were talking about being in the customs union, the single market. This is all supposed to be so straightforward. So, I really contest the fact that the public voted for no deal. I don't actually think there is a democratic mandate for no deal. And, I think if, the government are determined to push us over the cliff, they've got to go back to the public and say, is this really what you meant when you asked us to leave? And my view is, I'm not sure when people look at the prospects for our country in the future, the fact that it will make families that are already struggling, communities that are already under pressure, worse off, it will hurt them the most. I'm not sure people will look at this and say, actually, this is what we voted when we voted to take back control.
Here's Kevin.
Miatta, over the past week or so, we've seen Boris Johnson sort of pitching up everywhere and saying, I'll give you a few billion, you can have a few billion. And a couple of days ago, there was a story that the National Audit Office is going to examine the government throwing hundreds of millions of pounds at no-deal schemes over the next 3 months. Do you think that the audit office will find that these are all empty promises and that, in fact, the money will not really be available?
Well, so the government has suddenly found the magic money tree that didn't exist for a really long time.
Exactly.
And so we are getting these big spending commitments. And, the truth is, there is the space, and we have to be really clear. And I don't think the politicians are being that honest because they talk about money and they talk about headroom. And the thing they're not saying is that this is borrowing. We're just borrowing more, which is okay if we're investing it in the right thing. It's okay if we're investing it in things that are going to make our economy stronger, are going to improve people's lives. The problem, and the circle that the government is sort of trying to square, and I don't think they will, is that they're promising a whole lot of money, not just to do a no deal that's going to cost us in the end, not just to invest in public services, something I'd support, but also for tax cuts. They're talking about cutting corporation tax. They're talking about tax cuts for the wealthiest. And in the end, when you do the math, all of this doesn't stack up. You can't cut the tax base and then expect to have money to spend billions on things that are important and things that aren't important. So there's a lot of promises. I think that when they have to deliver, we might find them wanting.
Yes. What do you make of... I mean, I think it's quite interesting that that in terms of the money that Sajid Javid is sort of setting aside or borrowing, as you rightly said, for No Deal, included this sort of 300 million to increase freight capacity for critical goods like medicines. And I was astonished to see that, you know, that at the end of the sentence, for 4 years. Does that in terms of, I know you're primarily interested in the money side of things, but in terms of time, does 4 years sound like a reasonable transition period, not the official departure transition period, but a reasonable period of transition from EU membership to standalone sovereign state again? Because it seems quite a long time, 4 years to me.
So I think it's probably quite short. So the kind of stockpiling is to deal with the initial shock where things that have been in ready supply won't be in ready supply. I think 4 years is probably quite prudent because I think the big point is we say, you know, we're told by the government, we're just going to leave and then it's over. Well, we're going to leave and it begins. So at the point at which we crash out at No Deal, we're still going to have to go back to the EU and find and agree the terms by which we're going to coexist because we have to deal with the fact that we've got EU citizens here and we've got to deal with the fact that we've got British citizens who live in the EU. We're still going to have to think about what kind of trading relationship we want with the EU. So it's just the start. And that doesn't even factor all these trade deals. And trade deals take notoriously long periods of time. So you're talking about 10 years before this horror is over. So yes, we will leave, even if we leave on No Deal, but we begin a really, really painful long journey. And what really troubles me or worries me is in that 10 years, all the government's political bandwidth, all the space of the civil servants and other people will be sucked into this rather than dealing with some of the big economic challenges we need to.
But we'll have our freedom, Miatta. We'll have our freedom. We'll be free.
Well, we'll have our freedom, absolutely, but what do we want to do with that freedom?
I've no idea.
Go broke.
I'm going to push you on behalf of all of those who want to leave the European Union, who want to have their freedom to be broke. You're saying 10 years. Let's go with that. What happens after those 10 years and we've got our freedom back? Things could pick up. You know, we've been brilliant once before. We've been a great nation. We can be great again.
So absolutely, you know, and I'm not, you know, if we were leaving on sensible terms, I would be far more relaxed about it.
Yeah.
So I don't have that much of a problem with leaving. I don't think that in the end it's probably going to help us materially. I think that the things that people care about are things that, quite frankly, our government has control over. So the fact that our hospitals are failing, the fact that we've got housing crisis, the fact that people have seen a living standard squeeze is not to do with the European Union. It's to do with domestic policy. Choices that
Miatta, people are listening. They may take this on board. Shh, you can't go around telling the truth, Miatta. Heaven forbid, it's all the Europeans' fault.
Well, you know, so there's been a lot of blaming, and so
there has.
My thing is, whether we leave or not, the fundamental issues are issues for our government that they have 100% control over.
Okay.
And their failure to deal with that is a failure of the UK Parliament and the UK government. And so if we leave and they aren't willing and able to fix the issues that people want them to, we will just be exactly where, 10 years on, we'll be exactly where we are today.
Can I ask, Miatta, sorry, I'm pushed for time, but, Mark Carney, Governor of the Bank of England, has been saying that we face a 1 in 3 chance of going into recession with a no-deal Brexit. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I think with a no deal, so I think he was saying 1 in 3 chance of recession, no matter what version of Brexit go for, and then a no deal certain recession. And I think that's absolutely right. So, our economy is in quite a kind of dangerous, precarious position anyway. The global trends are going towards slowdown, so it's quite a risky time. It's such a risky thing.
I've got to leave it there. Miatta Fahnbulleh, Chief Exec of the New Economics Foundation. Lovely talking to you. I'm sure many of you listening won't believe a word she said, but I'll say that again. She's Chief Executive of the New Economics Foundation, so I suspect she knows a little about what she talks.